It happened at the dinner table of all places. The chicken was dry, overcooked by just a few minutes. But I didn't mention it. Tina never took feedback well, even gentle. We ate in that quiet, scraping kind of silence, the kind that isn't really silence, but a series of small negotiations. Forks tapping plates, water being sipped too carefully, elbows pulling back just slightly to avoid touching. Micah didn't look up when he said it. His voice was steady, disinterested, like he was reporting something he'd heard somewhere else. No one wants you around. It's just that. No tantrum. No drama. Not even the defiant edge of a teenager trying to provoke. Just observation. I remember the sound of the wall clock behind me. Soft tick, tick, that suddenly seemed louder. Tina didn't say anything. She just kept chewing, eyes lowered like she hadn't heard. Or maybe she had and decided not to intervene. Maybe she agreed. I cut another piece of chicken and placed it on my tongue. It tasted like nothing. I chewed anyway. There was a red glass on the table, the one with the chip at the rim. I always noticed that kind of thing. When I first moved in, I'd offered to throw it out, but Tina said no. It had sentimental value. Tonight, it just sat there between us like another thing no one wanted to address. Micah pushed his plate forward and stood up. No, excuse me. No, thanks. He walked off slow and unconcerned, shoulders slightly hunched from a day too long on a screen. The kitchen light flickered once, then steadied. I waited for Tina to say something. She didn't. Just took another bite of her green. Bean's eyes on the same spot on the table. Her silence felt practiced, not out of shock or confusion, but habit. Like she'd already rehearsed all the ways not to react. I cleared my plate, rinsed it under the tap. The water was warm but not hot. I didn't turn on the light in the hallway as I walked to my room. There's a certain comfort in knowing the layout of a house by memory, counting steps, fingertips brushing against corners. I sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced my shoes slowly, like I was winding down from something much longer than a dinner. Later that night, I made tea and brought it out to the porch. The chair creaked beneath me the way it always does. Air was cool, with a kind of brittle edge, like the last breath before a coming storm. I wrapped my shawl tighter, fingers brushing against the frayed threads near the neckline. I'd mended it once, long ago. Some things you can fix. I watched. The wind play with the screen door. It didn't knock, didn't ask. It just came in. I'd kept it out for so long, the knowing, the naming of things I'd hoped would shift on their own. But tonight, I let it pass through me. I didn't cry. That felt like something I'd already done in places no one saw. I thought about how words like that don't land all at once. They scatter. They settle into corners and coat the air like dust. You don't feel them at first, not fully. But later, as the night draws in and the lights go off, you find them in the smallest spaces, on your pillow, in the way you hold your breath for no reason. I thought of David, of the way he used to call Micah our little spark. How he'd say it with such pride, like the boy carried a piece of light too bright to ever dim. I wondered what he would have said tonight, sitting there at that table. I wondered if he would have heard it the way I did, not just a sentence, but a closing door. The tea went cold in my hands. I didn't drink it. Just held the cup like an anchor. The wind kept moving, quiet and unhurried. And I let it. For the first time, I let it. It was meant to be temporary. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Long enough to get through the worst of it, they'd said. Just until things settle. The funeral had left a hush in me I didn't know how to fill. The house was too quiet without David. Even the ticking of the stove clocks sounded different. Colder, maybe? Or louder? I couldn't tell. When they offered the spare room, I didn't hesitate. I packed neatly, folding my clothes with a kind of reverence. As if softness could convince the fabric to behave differently in someone else's home. Tina came by in the van. She'd vacuumed the back seat for me. I remember that? The spare room faced east. Mornings were warm, but not in the heavy, oppressive way. The sunlight slanted through the blinds like an old photograph, warm, gold, and quiet. There was a small bookshelf in the corner. I placed my 3 favorite cookbooks there. Tina had said I was welcome to use the kitchen any time. The first few days passed gently. Tina knocked on my door in the afternoons with a cup of chamomile, always warm, always with a little paper napkin tucked under. She was kind in the way polite people are, careful with their words, never too direct. I appreciated the effort. She asked how I was sleeping. I said fine, and we both let the lies settle between us like polite company. Micah was 15. Then he shuffled in and out of the living room like most teenagers do, always tethered to some glowing screen. But he'd sit near me in the evenings, his shoulder just brushing mine on the couch. He never spoke much, just the occasional yup or cool, but I didn't need conversation. I only needed presence. And for a while, that was enough. Sometimes Tina would play a soft podcast while cooking, something about home renovations or true crime. I never understood how those 2 categories blended, but she seemed soothed by it. She didn't ask me to help, though I often offered. I kept to wiping down counters, folding laundry when no one asked. It felt better to be useful, even in small, invisible ways. I started baking again, just muffins at first. Banana walnut. I remember Micah took 2 without a word, then another later that night. I noticed the empty plate in the sink and smiled quietly to myself. Tina said they were lovely. Her voice was always just an inch above neutral, pleasant, composed. It made me wonder what she sounded like when she wasn't performing. Hospitality. I called it nesting this small version of life I was building inside their home. I even bought a little plant for the windowsill, a pothos with long, lazy vines. I named it Gerald, though I didn't tell anyone that part. Every morning I made tea and drank it with the curtain half drawn. The sunlight came through in perfect lines, lighting up just the edge of the chair. That kind of light only lasts a few minutes, but I learned to time my mornings around it. Some days I'd close my eyes and imagine David sitting across from me, hands folded, the silence between us still warm. The quiet felt manageable back then. Not the heavy kind, but the waiting kind, like something was still deciding whether to bloom or fade. Micah once showed me a meme he thought was funny. I didn't fully understand it, but I laughed anyway, and he seemed satisfied. He didn't share much, but he didn't avoid me either. That mattered. Tina kept the house tidy. Her organization was meticulous. Labels on dry goods, towels folded, in thirds drawers that whispered closed. I admired it, though sometimes it felt like a showroom. Like any trace of chaos would be quietly escorted out before anyone noticed. At night, I'd lie in bed and listen to the faint murmur of the dishwasher, or the clink of a spoon in the sink. These were ordinary sounds, but to me, they were proof that life continued. And at that time, I needed reminding. It was peaceful in the beginning, safe even. I told myself I was healing, that grief just needed time and sunlight and other people's voices nearby. But healing has layers, and some layers hide things you don't yet know to question. Even now, when I think back to those first few weeks, I don't remember sadness. I remember stillness. And sometimes stillness is just silence with its hands folded in its lap, waiting for you to understand what it's hiding. It began with the curtains, the pale blue ones I'd brought from my old house, the ones David liked because they reminded him of early morning sky. I'd hung them up in the spare room without asking. It felt harmless, almost comforting to have something familiar. But a week later, they were folded on the bed when I came in from the market. No note, no mention. Just neatly replaced by a beige linen pair with thin vertical lines that didn't let much light in. I stood there a moment, staring at them, the room feeling both smaller and more curated. I didn't say anything. Not about the curtains, not about the shelf. That came next. The narrow wooden one I'd tucked against the wall to hold my books. Found it moved one morning, pushed into the closet with the books still stacked inside like forgotten belongings. Tina said nothing. She just asked if I wanted more tea. I told her I'd already had some, though I hadn't. She had a style, I reminded myself. A rhythm. The house was hers, after all. I was just the guest. A quiet one. Low maintenance. I never left dishes in the sink. Never raised my voice. But something in the air had shifted. Imperceptibly at first, like the temperature dipping a single degree, unnoticed until your fingers go still. There was a way she'd pause when I spoke. Not always, just now and then. A small delay, a flicker, as if she were considering whether my words warranted response. Sometimes she'd glance past me, eyes already on the next task, the next drawer to organize or counter to clear. I began to wonder if she was waiting for me to stop talking, or worse, waiting for me to stop being there. The towels changed too. I'd used the soft lavender ones I brought with me, but one morning they were gone from the rack. In their place were matching gray ones, monogrammed, folded in exact thirds. I found mine under the sink, slightly damp, as if moved hastily. I told myself it didn't matter. They were just towels. But the accumulation of small things isn't small. It grows. Gathers weight, presses in around the edges. I began to move more carefully through the house, watching where I placed my mug, checking twice before sitting on the living room couch. I started reading in my room more often, closing the door not out of anger, but to shrink the world a little. To make it mine again. Micah didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he kept it to himself. He was still polite, still quiet. But he no longer sat beside me on the couch. He passed by with headphones in, eyes down, the way teenagers do. I didn't expect more from him. He was just following the shape of the house. I was slowly learning that the shape didn't include me. Tina still smiled, still asked how I was sleeping. But her smile had become a little thinner. Her questions more perfunctory, like checking off a box. I answered just as lightly. We both knew the dance. One afternoon, I went to place my shoes by the door and saw a small woven basket with a note in Tina's tidy handwriting. "Shoes here, please." I hadn't remembered tracking dirt. I hadn't remembered being told. I slipped my shoes inside and said nothing. But that evening, I scrubbed the soles with a toothbrush before bed, just in case. I began to wonder how many small changes it takes before a space stops feeling like shelter and starts feeling like performance. I told myself I was being silly, that I was too sensitive. That grief distorts perception. But there was a quiet undertone to everything now, like the barely audible hum of a refrigerator, always there if you pay enough attention. And I had begun to pay attention. Not to accuse, not to stir, just to notice. Because there was a difference between being welcomed and being tolerated. And I was starting to feel the draft. It was tucked under the toaster, barely visible beneath a sheet of coupons. A scrap of paper, the corner torn, with a list scrawled in Tina's neat, looping hand. Tuesday, baked ziti. Thursday, laundry. Friday, mop floors. Next to each task was an initial T for Tina, M for Micah, and next to vacuum guest room, there it was, my name, or almost. Just the letter D, followed by a small question mark. It shouldn't have stung. Maybe it didn't. Not right away. I slid the paper back where it was, smoothing the edge with my palm as if the act itself could soften what I'd seen. I told myself it meant nothing. That she'd written it quickly. That maybe she hadn't known if I'd already done it or planned to. I told myself a lot of things that morning. The toaster ticked. The sun stretched across the linoleum floor in long yellow bands. I poured myself a cup of tea and stood there, cradling it in both hands like something breakable. The grocery list had changed too. At first, Tina had asked me what I liked. Cereal preference. She'd said, cheerful. David always liked the almond one, right? I'd smiled. I'd chosen something light and inexpensive, the kind that didn't make a fuss on a shelf. But it had disappeared quietly, week by week, without a word. Replaced by flax clusters, then granola, then nothing. I didn't bring it up. It wasn't worth the ripple. I simply stopped opening the cereal cabinet in the mornings. Toast was quieter, Micah. Had stopped saying goodnight. It was subtle. It's not a dramatic absence, just a skipped step in the usual routine. The first time I thought he was tired. The second, I assumed he'd forgotten. By the third, I realized he hadn't. He still nodded. When we passed in the hallway, still answered questions with short, polite replies. But something was missing. The slight upward curve in his voice. The easy comfort that used to rest between us. His presence had become a kind of formality. Like a thank you card written out of duty. I didn't ask him if something was wrong. I didn't want to plant the question in his mind if it wasn't already there. Some things I've learned slip away more easily when you try to hold them too early. It's like a dream you wake from before it's finished, only to watch it dissolve. The moment you name it out loud that week, I started taking longer walks. Past the corner store, up the hill by the school. I timed it so I'd return when the house was quieter. Less conversation meant fewer moments to misread. I folded my laundry with more care. Dusted corners no one asked me to. I began to feel like a guest who'd overstayed without realizing it. But instead of being asked to leave, I was simply being nudged. Gently, without words. I found myself thinking more about David. About how we used to navigate tension without saying it outright. How silence could be generous. Or it could be withholding. I wasn't yet sure which kind I was surrounded by. The list under the toaster stayed there for days. I checked once more, midweek. The question mark remained, untouched, undecided, and maybe that was the truest part of it, that I was no longer a person with a role, but a presence to be placed, a variable, a question. So I carried the doubt like a folded note in my pocket. It's unreadable to anyone but me. My birthday passed quietly. Hadn't mentioned it much, maybe once, the week before, in passing. I didn't expect a fuss. I never have. But still, you notice who remembers. You notice how Tina made cupcakes? They were chocolate with a swirl of pink frosting and silver sprinkles that stuck to your fingers. She placed them on a ceramic platter and set them on the counter, like something she might have made for a school bake sale. There was no candle, no song. It's just a faint, cheerful, "These are for your birthday," as if to keep things light. Micah didn't come out of his room. He wasn't sick. I'd heard him laughing through the wall earlier, the kind of laugh that only comes from headphones and a screen. I thought maybe he'd come down eventually. He didn't. We ate the cupcakes standing. At the kitchen counter, Tina asked me if they were moist enough. Said they were. I noticed she didn't have one herself. Just picked at the edge of a wrapper, then rinsed her hands. She poured sparkling water into glasses, 3 on a tray. And I noticed immediately that mine was different. It's the old red one, with the chipped edge near the lip. The other 2 were tall, clear, elegant, STEMWARE. It was a small thing, maybe? But I had bought that glass set myself years ago. I remembered the feel of the box when I carried it home from the shop. 6 pieces, perfectly smooth. I'd kept them for holidays, for evenings with David, and I would have known if one had cracked. The chip was fresh, not jagged, but recent enough that I noticed it when I lifted it to my mouth. Tina didn't mention it, didn't flinch when she handed it over. Just passed it like it was nothing, like it hadn't once sat beside 5 others at my own table. We clinked glasses, a soft, uneven sound. Hers was full, mine barely half. Afterward, I washed the dishware while Tina answered emails in the other room. The pink frosting smeared along the sink basin. I watched it swirl down the drain, slow and almost pretty. I cleaned the chipped glass last, holding it gently, my thumb grazing the rough edge as if to confirm it wasn't just imagined. That night, I sat at the small desk. In my room, the one I'd tucked against the wall near the window. I pulled out the little notebook I used to keep grocery lists in, and I began writing, not in anger, not to keep a record for anyone else, just a list, a private one. 1 line per page, no dates, no explanations. Curtain swapped, shelf moved. Grocery list cereal gone. Note with question mark. Birthday glass. The page looked harmless. Simple, like a child's diary. But there was something anchoring about it. Something steadying. I didn't need to prove anything. Not yet. I wasn't even sure if there was anything to prove. But memory is fragile, especially when doubt starts to seep into it. So I wrote too. Remember not to accuse? I thought again of Micah, how he hadn't texted, how he hadn't said goodnight. How 15 can be a messy, quiet age. But still, I'd never imagined this much distance could fit inside the walls of a single house. Sometimes absence is louder than presence. Sometimes it has its own shape, its own temperature. That night, I felt it settle beside me like a second shadow. The notebook stayed on my nightstand. I didn't hide it. I didn't need to. I doubted anyone would be looking for something like that. I turned off the light and lay still, the edge of the chipped glass still warm in my palm from earlier. Sat on the dresser now, catching a sliver of streetlight. Some things leave a mark you can't name, not bruises, not scars. Just soft indentations where something used to feel like home. They thought I was asleep. The house was quiet, that slow kind of quiet that settles after the dishwasher's final cycle. After the click of light switches and the soft tread of bare feet retreating down hallways. My door was closed, the hallway dark. I lay on my side with the blanket pulled gently over my hip, eyes open just enough to trace the outline of the dresser in the near dark. The fan above me turned in its slow, predictable rhythm, whispering a hush with every spin. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just there, awake. It's strange how sleep thins out as you age, how the hours stretch longer and the mind won't settle like it used to. I heard their voices through the wall, not loud, not hushed, just ordinary. Kitchen table voices, the kind used for unimportant things. Tina said it plainly, her tone clipped and efficient, like reading a label aloud. She's had a good run. It's time Micah had the room. And then laughter. Not mocking, not sharp. Just light, casual. The kind of laugh that follows a joke not meant to be funny, just true. I imagined them sitting across from each other, her with that tired little smile she saves for long days. Micah hunched over his phone, nodding without looking up. It wasn't what she said that caught me. It was how easily she said it. How little weight it carried for her, like she was rearranging furniture, not lives. I stayed still. I didn't move, not even to shift the blanket. I didn't want the floorboards to creak beneath me, didn't want the walls to give me away. There was something about hearing yourself mentioned like that, as if you were already gone, that makes your body tighten into itself. I stared at the ceiling, at the old fan circling above me. The blades moved with a kind of patient slowness, like time forgetting itself. Each spin was a breath, each breath a question. Had I overstayed? Had I missed some cue to leave? Micah hadn't looked me in the eyes in days. He barely said hello. Now, he passed by me like steam, not unfriendly, just untouchable. And maybe Tina had been waiting for me to notice, to make it easier on everyone. Maybe this was her way of nudging things into motion without having to ask. I thought about the room, about how I'd placed my slippers neatly beside the bed, folded. The blanket each morning kept the dresser drawers half empty, so I wouldn't seem like I'd made a home. I'd left space, hadn't I? I'd tried to float, not settle. But maybe even that had been too much. The chipped glass, the cereal, the question mark on the list, it all came back like a slow wash of color. Quiet things, small things. But together, they painted a shape I could no longer unsee. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the refrigerator in the other room. The gentle murmur of Tina's voice again, muffled this time, words lost. To the wall, the house had rhythms I had learned intimately. When she loaded the dishwasher, how she tapped her phone before setting it on the charger. The soft sigh she gave before bed, and now I knew something else. I knew that the place I had once been offered, that soft space carved out for me in the name of family and grief, had started to shrink in her mind. My presence had become a negotiation. It inconvenienced to be politely transitioned, but I didn't cry, not out of pride. Just because there was no surprise left in it, I had known for a while. You always know, even if you pretend not to. The notebook was still beside my bed. I thought about writing it down, the sentence exactly as I heard it, but I didn't. Not this time. Some truths, once heard, settled deeper than ink can reach. I let the fan turn above me. I let the moment breathe itself out. There was nothing to confront, not yet. Only the knowledge that something had shifted for good that night. I lay still and waited for the world to slow enough to follow. It had been there for years. Tucked inside the back corner of the desk drawer, wrapped in the same cream stationery David had insisted on using. Even when checks had gone digital and banks had become faceless, the envelope was sealed. My handwriting, still steady back then, spelled Mika's name in blue ink. We started the fund after his second birthday. A quiet decision made over tea one morning when the sun was slow to rise and David had smiled at me from across the table with that unspoken certainty he carried in small, meaningful moments. For his future, we'd said, whatever he chooses, we weren't wealthy, but we were steady. Every year on his birthday, we'd add a little more. $50, sometimes $100, not much, but consistent. And over time, it became something real, something with weight. Even after David passed, I didn't touch it. I thought about it briefly during the funeral arrangements. The costs had piled fast, but I couldn't bring myself to break the seal. Some things felt sacred, but that morning I opened the drawer and stared at it differently. The name no longer felt like a promise. It felt like a question. Micah hadn't spoken to me in 2 days. Not out of anger. He didn't even seem angry anymore. Just uninterested. Like I was the quiet hum of a fridge in the background. Present, but ignoble. The kind of sound you don't realize has stopped until it's gone. And Tina had stopped asking how I slept. She moved past me in the hallway like a breeze that didn't know it was passing through. I'd become a fixture. Polished. Quiet, unacknowledged. I held the envelope in both hands. The paper had softened over time, the corners slightly curved. I imagined David watching me, not judging, just observing. That's how he was. He'd let silence make its own shape before offering a thought. I wondered what he'd say now. I wondered if he'd still want Micah to have it. There had been no thank you. Not once. Not when I moved in. Not for the meals I cooked, or the laundry I folded, or the garden I kept from dying. And certainly not for the intention that sat inside this envelope. Pressed into neat folds and accumulated over years of quiet hope, is love still love when it goes unnoticed? When it turns invisible in the room where it was once invited? I thought of all the birthdays, the cupcakes, the cards, the way Micah used to sit on David's lap and tug at his beard. I used to believe memories like that held power. Now I wasn't sure if they held anything at all, except me. I traced the letters of his name again. Slowly, the pen had bled just slightly through the paper. Small blue shadow. There's a difference between giving and being taken from. One is an offering. The other a quiet erosion. And maybe I was no longer interested in preserving what no one planned to protect. Maybe legacy wasn't about loyalty to the past, but clarity in the present. I placed the envelope in my handbag, not angrily, not in haste, just carefully. It's like someone putting away a piece of themselves they no longer wanted mishandled. The sun shifted through the blinds, slicing the room into warm, uneven shapes. The air felt thick with something unspoken, like a conversation I didn't make a list that day. I didn't bake. I just let the silence sit beside me and said nothing. Some gifts go unwrapped, not because they are forgotten, but because someone never bothered to notice the hands that held them. I left before sunrise. The sky was still a dull gray with only the faintest hint of light curling along the edges. The kind of hour where nothing insists on being noticed yet. Even the birds waited. I folded the laundry first. Towels, shirts, one of Micah's hoodies that had been sitting in the dryer for 2 days. I didn't rush. I smoothed each one the way I always did. Corners aligned, sleeves tucked. There's a rhythm to care, even when it's no longer asked for. The house was still. I moved through it quietly, not tiptoeing, but careful, the way one walks through someone else's dream. I wiped down the bathroom sink. The one in the hallway they all used, but no one cleaned. A few water spots, a hair. Near the faucet, a smear of toothpaste on the mirror, all gone in seconds. My small parting gift. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe one. There were no accusations to scrawl, no lists to tape to the fridge. The truth of it had already spoken, not in words, but in absences, in silences. In that slow vanishing that happens when someone stops seeing you. The envelope was already in my bag. I'd packed the night before, just the essentials. A few dresses, my notebook, a framed photo of David I kept by the bed. Not the wedding photo, but the one from the beach where the wind had caught his. Here and he looked half amused, half ready to chase something. I liked remembering him in motion. I didn't look in on Micah. His door was shut. I imagined him curled in a tangle of blankets, lost in the soft blue light of his phone. He wouldn't wake for hours. Tina's door was closed too. The hallway felt longer than usual, as if the space itself knew this was the last time I'd move through it. I passed the kitchen, paused at the counter where the toaster sat. The paper list was gone now, or buried somewhere new. No question marks left to solve. Outside, the driveway was damp from the night air. I walked past the recycling bins, the ones I used to pull to the curb each Thursday without being asked. Past the mailbox where nothing ever came for me anymore. The bag was heavier than it needed to be. But I carried it without trouble. Sometimes you find strength in the leaving that you never had in the staying. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink too much. There was nothing dramatic in it. Just a steady kind of calm, the kind that comes when the decision no longer trembles in your hands. I didn't know exactly where I'd go, only that I wouldn't be coming back. There's a clarity that settles. In you, when you stop negotiating your worth in someone else's space, when you finally understand that love without respect is just another form of quiet erasure. I crossed the street slowly, the morning still holding its breath. The world hadn't noticed yet that I was gone. And neither had they. That, I think, was the clearest sign of all. I live near the coast now. It's a quiet stretch of land where the wind smells faintly of salt and rosemary. And the evenings come slow and golden, like they're reluctant to interrupt. The town is small, the kind where people wave without asking questions. No one knows my name. I like that. There's a softness in being unknown, a kind of freedom I hadn't realized I missed. The house I rent is simple. One story, old floorboards that creak with honesty and windows that rattle when the sea gets bold. I keep the curtains open most days. I like the way the light spills in without asking. I water the plants each morning, even the ones that don't need much. There's a rose bush that leans toward the fence like it's trying to listen. A patch of mint that grows too fast and reminds me to use what I have while it lasts. Most afternoons, I walk along the narrow path behind the dunes. It winds past a small chapel, a grocery with a squeaky door, and ends near a bench that overlooks the water. I sit there sometimes with a thermos of tea and a book I don't always read. Just holding it feels like company. I mail postcards to myself. Little notes that say things like the sea is patient today or the tomatoes are ripening early. I keep them in a tin box on the mantel. Sometimes I reread them when the fog rolls in and the silence gets too still. The envelope is still sealed. It lives in a wooden box beneath my bed, wrapped in an old scarf David once used for raking leaves. His scent is gone now, but the memory isn't. The handwriting hasn't faded either. Mika's name, written in a hand that still believed in futures. I take the box out once in a while, not to count the money, not to imagine what it could buy, just to remind myself that I once held something for someone who never reached back. Maybe one day I'll give it away. Maybe two, someone who sees me clearly. Or maybe not. I used to think closure needed a door slammed shut, a final word. But now I know it can look like a quiet walk at dusk, a meal cooked just for yourself, a window left open without worry. Micah and Tina don't call. I don't expect them to. The story they tell themselves likely ends with me drifting off, irrelevant and forgettable, and that's fine. Their version doesn't require my presence. What matters is that I'm no longer waiting to be invited back. There's a market every Thursday here. I buy lemons and fresh bread, sometimes a jar of honey from a woman who smells like lavender. She never asks who I'm buying for it at night. I light a single candle on the windowsill. The flame flickers gently, casting long golden shadows across the room. It doesn't try to be more than it is. The silence here is different. Not empty, not cold, just unoccupied. It belongs to me now, and in that quiet I have found the shape of myself again, not in what I gave, not in what I lost, but in the space I finally allowed to be mine.